Brethren, welcome to Shabbat services, and today is the 28th day of counting. It is the 7th day of the fourth week, and it is the fourth Sabbath of counting. So we're now over halfway on our journey to Pentecost, and we look forward to this upcoming high day and the symbolism that has for us and all the people of Yehovah. Today's message is a continuation of our study series on the Statement of Understanding. This week we are studying the lost tribes, and let me read you what the Statement of Understanding says, and then we will go into our study. There is a clear distinction between Judah and Israel. It was Yehovah's will that they separate into two camps. The tribes of Israel were carried away by the Assyrians to be scattered among the Gentiles, never to have returned to the promised land. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin, with some Levites, remained. Judah was carried away by the Babylonians, but a remnant later returned with Nehemiah. The apostles were commissioned to preach the gospel to the lost sheep of Israel and the Gentiles. In the end time, Judah and Israel shall return to the land and be rejoined, never to be divided again. So today's message is one that a lot of people have difficulty with, because the typical common understanding is that the Jews and the Israelis and those people who live in Israel are the chosen people. They are the descendants of biblical people. But when you study the scriptures, there is actually a significant distinction between the Jews, the house of Judah, and the house of Israel. And so we're going to study that today, and we're going to understand the prophetic importance that distinction has and how it affects our people as we come into the time of the end. So we'll start today's message by turning to the first book of Kings. So we'll go to 1 Kings chapter 15, and we'll start in verse 1. 1 Kings 15, starting in verse 1. In the 8th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam became king over Judah, and he reigned 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maachah, the granddaughter of Abishalom. And he walked in all the sins of his father, which he had done before him. His heart was not loyal to Yehovah his mighty one, as was the heart of his father David. Nevertheless, for David's sake, Yehovah his mighty one gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, by setting up his son after him, and by establishing Jerusalem. Because David did what was right in the eyes of Yehovah, and had not turned aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. Now the rest of the acts of Abijam, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. So Abijam rested with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. Then Asa his son reigned in his place. In the 20th year of Jeroboam king of Israel, Asa became king over Judah, and he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. His grandmother's name was Maachah, the granddaughter of Abishalom. Asa did what was right in the eyes of Yehovah, as did his father David. And he banished the perverted persons from the land, and removed all of the idols that his father had made. And he removed Maachah, his grandmother, from being queen mother, because she had made an obscene image of Asherah. And Asa cut down her obscene image and burned it by the brook of Kidron. But the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was loyal to Yehovah all his days. And he brought into the house of Yehovah the things which his father had dedicated, and the things which he himself had dedicated, silver and gold and utensils. Now there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. And Baasha, king of Israel, came up against Judah, and built Ramah, that he might let none go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa took all the silver and gold that was left in the treasuries of the house of Yehovah, and the treasuries of the king's house, and delivered them to the hand of his servant. And King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, the son of Tabrimon, the son of Hezion, king of Syria, who dwelt in Damascus, saying, Let there be a treaty between you and me, as there is between my father and your father. See, I have sent you a present of silver and gold. Come and break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so that he will withdraw from me." So Ben-Hadad heeded King Asa, and sent the captain of his armies against the cities of Israel. He attacked Ijon, Dan, Abel Beth Machah, and all Chinneroth with all the land of Naphtali. Now it happened when Baasha heard it, that he stopped building Ramah, and remained in Tirzah. Then King Asa made a proclamation throughout all of Judah. None was exempted, and they took away the stones and the timbers of Ramah, which Baasha had used for building, and with them King Asa built Geba of Benjamin, and Mizpah. The rest of the acts of Asa, and all his might that he did, and the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? But in the time of his old age he was diseased in his feet. So Asa rested with his fathers, and buried with his fathers in the city of David his father. Then Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his place. So here we see just one of the chapters of the kings of Israel and kings of Judah. And you'll notice in verse 9 it said, "And in the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, reigned Asa over Judah." Now, you can't have two kings ruling over one land. So people who say, well, Israel and Judah are the same, are mistaken, because a king rules over a territory. So you can't have the same land, the king of Israel and the king of Judah, being two different people, and at the same time both being kings over the same land. That just doesn't work. And indeed, if you look down in verses 16 and 17, you see this statement. "And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. And Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah, and built Ramah, that he might not suffer any to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah." So here we see explicitly, Asa is king of Judah, Baasha is king of Israel, and Baasha and Asa were at war, and the king of Israel was at war with the king of Judah. So even in Old Testament times, these are two separate and divided kingdoms, and there is, as we see here, conflict and friction between the two kingdoms. So what happened to these two kingdoms? Well, let's see. Let's turn forward to the second book of Kings, and let us see what happened to Israel in the first place. 2 Kings 17, and we'll start in verse 5. 2 Kings chapter 17, starting in verse 5. "Now the king of Assyria went throughout all the land, and went up to Samaria, and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away to Assyria, and placed them in Halah, and by the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against Jehovah their mighty one, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared their gods, and had walked in the statutes of the nations whom Jehovah had cast out from before them, the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel which they had made. Also the children of Israel secretly did against Jehovah their mighty one things that were not right, and they built for themselves high places in all their cities, from watchtower to fortified city. And they set up for themselves sacred pillars and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree. There they burned incense on all the high places, like the nations whom Jehovah had carried away before them. And they did wicked things to provoke Jehovah to anger. For they served idols of which Jehovah had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." Yet Jehovah testified against Israel and against Judah by all his prophets, every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you by my servants the prophets." Nevertheless they would not hear, but stiffened their necks, like the necks of their fathers who did not believe in the Jehovah their mighty one. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he had made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he had testified against them. They followed idols, became idolaters, and went after the nations who were all around them, concerning whom Jehovah had charged them that they should not do like them. So they left all the commandments of Yahweh their mighty one, made for themselves a moulded image and 2 calves, made a wooden image, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire, practiced witchcraft and soothsaying, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of Yahweh, to provoke him to anger. Therefore Yahweh was very angry with Israel, and removed them from his sight, for there was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. Also Judah did not keep the commandments of Yahweh their mighty one, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they had made. And Yahweh rejected all the descendants of Israel, afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of plunderers, until he had cast them from his sight. For he tore Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. Then Jeroboam drove Israel from following Yahweh, and made them commit a great sin. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam which he did. They did not depart from them, until Yahweh removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So Israel was carried away from their own land to Assyria, as it is to this day. So here we hear the end of Israel, and it says in verse 23, until Yahweh removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So Israel was carried out of their own land to Assyria under this day. And Israel, as we read at the beginning of that section, was resident in Samaria, and the Assyrians came down and took them and plundered Samaria and carried them away into captivity, leaving just the tribe of Judah in the land of Judah. So now what happened to the children of Judah? Well, let's turn forward just a few pages and let us find out the events concerning Judah. 2 Kings chapter 25, and we will start in verse 1. 2 Kings 25, starting in verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon and all his armies came against Jerusalem and encamped against it. And they built a siege wall around it, all around. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine had become so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city wall was broken through, and all the men of war fled at night by way of the gate between the 2 walls, which was by the king's garden, even though the Chaldeans were still encamped all around the city, and the king went by way of the plain. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king, and they overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his army was scattered from him. So they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they pronounced judgment on him. Then they killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, put out the eyes of Zedekiah, bound him with bronze fetters, and took him to Babylon. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the 7th of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of Yahweh and the king's house, all the houses of Jerusalem, that is, all the houses of the great he burned with fire. And all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls of Jerusalem all around. Then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive the rest of the people who remained in the city, and the defectors who had deserted to the king of Babylon with the rest of the multitude. And the captain of the guard left some of the poor of the land as vine dressers and farmers. The bronze pillars that were in the house of Yahweh, and the carts and the bronze sea that were in the house of Yahweh, the Chaldeans broke in pieces, and carried their bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, the shovels, the trimmers, the spoons, and all the bronze utensils with which the priests ministered, the fire pans and the basins, and things of solid gold and solid silver, the captain of the guard took away. The 2 pillars, 1 sea, and the carts which Solomon had made for the house of Yahweh. The bronze of all these articles was beyond measure. The height of 1 pillar was 18 cubits, and the capital on it was of bronze. The height of the capital was 3 cubits, and the network and pomegranates all around the capital were all of bronze. The second pillar was the same with a network. And the captain of the guard took Seraiah, the chief of the priests, Zephaniah, the second priest, and the 3 doorkeepers. He also took out of the city an officer who had the charge of the men of war, 5 men of the king's close associates, who were found in the city, the chief recruiting officer of the army, who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. So Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, took these and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. Then the king of Babylon struck them and put them to death at Riblah, in the land of Hamath. Then Judah was carried away captive from its own land. So here we see that the fate of Judah followed very quickly on the fate of Israel. In verse 21 it says, "And the king of Babylon smote them, and slew them at Riblah, in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away out of their land." So now we see, by the time we get to this second captivity, this is known as the Babylonian captivity, there are very, very few people left in what Jehovah would identify as the land of Israel. The Israelites were taken captive by the king of Assyria and taken off into captivity, and then some years later the children of Judah were taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So now Israel is taken into captivity, and then I think about 70 years later Judah followed into captivity, and so the land of Israel is now devoid of both Israelites and Jews. So what happened? Well, let's turn forward and let's look at the book of Nehemiah to find out what happened. Nehemiah chapter 2, and we will start in verse 1. Nehemiah 2, starting in verse 1. "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, on the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, 'Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart.' So I became dreadfully afraid. And I said to the king, 'May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire?' Then the king said to me, 'What do you request?' So I prayed to the mighty one of heaven, and I said to the king, 'If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favour in your sight, I ask then that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it.' Then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, 'How long will your journey be? And when will you return?' So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Furthermore I said to the king, 'If it pleases the king, that letters be given to me for the governor of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy.' And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my mighty one upon me. Then I went to the governor of the region beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel." So, what happened? Well, in verse 5 it says this, "And I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if thy servant have found favour in thy sight, that thou wouldst send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it." And for those of us that have studied the story of Nehemiah, we see that Nehemiah the governor and Ezra the priest returned to Jerusalem. They rebuilt the walls, they rebuilt the gates, and for the Jewish people they started the return to Jerusalem. But notice that it is to Judah that he returned. The Jews who were in the Babylonian captivity returned with him. So we still have not found anything of the tribe of Israel. And common understanding is that these tribes were lost in antiquity. They merged in with the peoples around them. They lost their identity and they no longer exist. And so people now generally just consider the children of Judah to represent all the tribes of Israel. But is that in fact true? Let's turn to the Gospel of Matthew and let us find what Yehoshua tells us during his ministry some 2,000 years ago. So Matthew chapter 10, and we'll start in verse 1. Matthew 10, starting in verse 1. And when he had called his 12 disciples to him, he gave them powers over unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these: first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname is Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. These 12 Yehoshua sent out and commanded them, saying, Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Provide neither gold nor silver nor copper in your money belts, nor bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staffs, for a worker is worthy of his food. Now whatever city or town you enter, inquire who in it is worthy, and stay there till you go out. And when you go into a household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you nor hear your words when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. Assuredly I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. So what did Yehoshua tell the disciples? In verses 5 and 6 it says this: These 12 Yehoshua sent forth and commanded them, saying, Go not into the way of Gentiles, and into the city of the Samaritans enter ye not, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, if the house of Israel was truly lost and was assimilated into the Gentile nations, what Yehoshua is telling these people is impossible. He says, do not go to the Gentiles, do not go to the Samaritans, but go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So if the Israelites had been assimilated into the Gentile nations and being lost forever, this instruction that Yehoshua gave the disciples would have been nonsense. And of course we know that Yehoshua didn't give people impossible tasks. So Yehoshua, as far as he was concerned, the tribes of Israel were still identifiable and were known to the people of the day. So he told them to go to the lost tribes of Israel. Now some people say, well, that's the remnant that existed outside of Judea. What we read in the earlier books has been in Samaria. But if we look here, after the Jews returned, another group of people came and they followed a corrupted form of Judaism, and the Samaritans. And this is why there was such conflict between the Jews and the Samaritans, because the Jews considered the Samaritans to be usurpers of the true faith. But they were told, do not go into a city of the Samaritans. So the children of Judah, the disciples, must have known how to find the lost tribes of Israel, because Yehoshua sent them there. So as little as 2,000 years ago, the identity of the lost tribes was known. And it's not in what the Old Testament would call Israel, so they were scattered somewhere. But let's look at what happens to Israel later on. Let's carry on reading from verse 16. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before the governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak. For it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Now brother will deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in this city, flee to another. For assuredly I say to you, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor is a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher, and a servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household? Therefore do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. So of course Yehoshua is talking prophetically here. He's talking about the end time. He's talking about the people who are going through this ministry. And look at in verse 23, it says, but when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another. For verily I say unto you, ye shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man come. So what Yehoshua is saying is that Israel is so extensive and so spread around that these disciples and those who carry the gospel message will not have gone through all the cities of Israel before Yehoshua returns. So this is not talking about a very small piece of the Middle East. This is not talking about the land outside Judea. This is talking about Israel being spread across the globe, across the world. And Yehoshua was saying that they will not, the disciples and then the evangelists who go after them and those who preach the gospel in this time will not have reached through all the cities of Israel before Yehoshua returns. So Israel is out there. Israel is scattered abroad, and Israel has a distinct identity which Yehoshua still refers to. Now, at this point, some people say, well, this teaching denies the Scripture. Yehoshua says that all the Gentiles, Jews are all one. They can come together in Him, and that is true. All the world, all of humanity has the opportunity to come into a relationship with Yehoshua. We can either be descendants of Israel, we can be physical and genetic descendants of Israel, or we can be grafted into spiritual Israel. That opportunity is open to all people. But the opportunity to be grafted into spiritual Israel does not deny the fact that physical Israel did exist, was scattered, and still does exist. And so we need to understand that the teaching today is not an exclusivist teaching. We're not saying you have to be a descendant of Israel to be saved. We're not saying you have to be a descendant of Israel to receive the promise. What we are saying is there is a physical Israel that is still abroad on the earth. Although the vast majority of modern day Israel, they do not know their heritage. They do not know their ancestry, and they are lost because they do not know who they are. But all the world can come in. I mean, let's just turn over just a few more pages and look at the final instruction that Yehoshua gave to his disciples. Let's go to Matthew 28. And Matthew 28, we'll start reading in verse 16. Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, to the mountain which Yehoshua had appointed for them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Yehoshua came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the set-apart Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So here we see the final instruction to Yehoshua gave the disciples. Go therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the set-apart Spirit. So here we see Yehoshua telling his disciples to baptize all the nations. So he is not being exclusivist. He's not saying only descendants of Israel, only descendants of Judah can receive this blessing. But our faith is exclusivist. It is exclusive because only those people who choose to do his will and obey the commandments are allowed to enter in. So this is an exclusive club, if you like. It is an exclusive opportunity for us. It's available to everybody. The barrier to entry is not some man-made tribal ancestry. It's not your wealth. It's not your profession. It's not your place of residence. The exclusivity is whether you choose to do the will of Jehovah and to be obedient to his commandments. So anybody can enter, but few do. And that's what we need to understand. The true faith is a small faith. The true faith is for a very small group of people who choose of their own heart to follow the will of Jehovah. But having said that, those of us who follow his will, those of us who receive the Ruach HaKodesh, those of us who become truly grafted into spiritual Israel, can still not deny that there is a physical Israel out there, and physical Israel still has a significant end-time role to play in Bible prophecy. So let's now look at the significance of Israel in Bible prophecy, and let's look at who these people are and what Yehovah called them. So let's turn all the way back to the beginning again. This time we'll go back to the book of Deuteronomy, and we'll go to Deuteronomy chapter 7, and we'll start in verse 1. When Jehovah your mighty one brings you into the land which you go out to possess, and he cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when Jehovah your mighty one delivers them over to you, and you shall conquer them, and utterly destroy them, you shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter for your son. For they will turn your sons away from following me, to serve other gods. So the anger of Jehovah will be aroused against you, and destroy you suddenly. But thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars, and break down the sacred pillars, and cut down their wooden images, and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a set-apart people, to Jehovah your mighty one. For Jehovah your mighty one has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. Jehovah did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you were more in number than the other people, for you were the least of all people. But because Jehovah loves you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers, Jehovah has brought you out of it with a mighty hand, and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Therefore know that Jehovah your mighty one, he is the mighty one, the faithful mighty one, who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. And he repays those who hate him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack with him who hates him. He will repay him to his face. So what does Jehovah say in verse 6? For thou art a set-apart people unto Jehovah the mighty one. Jehovah, thy mighty one, hath chosen thee to be a special people unto him, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. So Israel are the chosen people, not just Judah, not just the Jews. The whole of Israel were the chosen people. The whole of Israel consists of the tribes of Judah, or the kingdom of Judah, and the kingdom of Israel. The whole of Israel consists of all 12 tribes, of which the Jews are just one tribe. So Israel was a chosen people for Jehovah. Now we know in other stories that he divorced Israel, but still we are a chosen people. Still it is Jehovah's desire that we fulfill his ministry and his service. So let's look at this. Let's look at what happened to Israel and to Judah in the time before the captivity. Let's go to Ezekiel, and we'll go to Ezekiel 23. And we will start in verse 1. Ezekiel 23, starting in verse 1. Then the word of Jehovah came to me again, saying, Son of man, there were 2 women, the daughters of one mother. They committed harlotry in Egypt. They committed harlotry in their youth. Their breasts were there embraced. Their virgin bosom was there pressed. Their names, Oholah the elder, and Oholibah her sister, they were mine, and they bore sons and daughters. As for their names, Samaria is Oholah, and Jerusalem is Oholibah. Aholah played the harlot, even though she was mine, and she lusted for her lovers, the neighbouring Assyrians, that were clothed in purple, captains and rulers, all of them desirable young men, horsemen riding on horses. Thus she committed her harlotry with them, all of them choice men of Assyria, and with all for whom she lusted. With her idols she defiled herself. She has never given up her harlotry brought from Egypt. For her youth they had lain with her, pressed her virgin bosom, and poured out their immorality upon her. Therefore I have delivered her into the hand of her lovers, into the hand of the Assyrians, for whom she lusted. They uncovered her nakedness, took away her sons and daughters, and slew her with the sword. She became a byword among women, and they executed judgment on her. Now although her sister Oholibah saw this, she became more corrupt than in her lust than she, and in her harlotry more corrupt than her sister's harlotry. She lusted for the neighbouring Assyrians, captains and rulers, clothed most gorgeously, horsemen riding on horses, all of them desirable young men. Then I saw that she was defiled. Both took the same way, but she increased her harlotry. She looked at men portrayed on the wall, images of Chaldeans portrayed in vermilion, girded with belts around their waist, flowing turbans on their heads, all of them looking like captains, in the manner of the Babylonians of Chaldea, the land of their nativity. As soon as her eyes saw them, she lusted for them, and sent messengers to them in Chaldea. Then the Babylonians came to her in the bed of love, and they defiled her with their immorality. So she was defiled by them, and alienated herself from them. She revealed her harlotry and uncovered her nakedness. Then I alienated myself from her, and I alienated myself from her sister. Yet she multiplied her harlotry, in calling to remembrance the days of her youth, when she had played the harlot in the land of Egypt. For she lusted for her paramours, whose flesh is like the flesh of donkeys, and whose issue is like the issue of horses. Thus you called to remembrance the lewdness of your youth, when the Egyptians pressed your bosom because of your youthful breasts. Therefore, O Oholibah, thus says the Master Jehovah, Behold, I will stir up your lovers against you, from whom you have alienated yourself, and I will bring them against you from every side. The Babylonians, the Chaldeans, Pekod, Shoa, Koa, all the Assyrians with them, all of them desirable young men, governors and rulers, captains and men of renown, all of them riding on horses. And they shall come against you with chariots, wagons, and war horses. With a horde of people they shall array against you, buckler, shield, and helmet all around. I will delegate judgment to them, and they shall judge you according to their judgments. I will set my jealousy against you, and they shall deal furiously with you. They shall remove your nose and your ears, and your remnant shall fall by the sword. And they shall take your sons and your daughters, and your remnant shall be devoured by fire. They shall also strip you of your clothes and take away your beautiful jewellery. Thus I will make you cease your lewdness and your harlotry, brought from the land of Egypt, so that they will not lift your eyes to them, nor remember Egypt any more. For thus says the Master Jehovah, Surely I will deliver you into the hand of those who hate, into the hand of those whom you alienated yourself. They will deal hatefully with you, take away all you have worked for, and leave you naked and bare. The nakedness of your harlotry shall be uncovered, both your lewdness and your harlotry. I will do these things to you, because they have gone as a harlot after the Gentiles, because you have become defiled with their idols. You have walked in the way of your sister, therefore I will put her cup in your hand. Thus says the Master Jehovah, You shall drink of your sister's cup, the deep and wide one. You shall be laughed to scorn, and held in derision. It contains much. You will be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, the cup of horror and desolation. The cup of your sister Samaria, you shall drink and drain it. You shall break its shards and tear at your own breast, for I have spoken, says the Master Jehovah. Therefore thus says the Master Jehovah, because you have forgotten me, and cast me behind your back, therefore you shall bear the penalty of your lewdness and your harlotry. Jehovah said to me, Son of man, will you judge Aholah and Aholibah? Then declare to them their abominations. For they have committed adultery, and blood is on their hands. They have committed adultery with their idols, and even sacrificed their sons whom they bore to me, passing them through the fire to devour them. Moreover, they have done this to me. They have defiled my sanctuary on the same day and profaned my Sabbaths. For after they have slain their children for their idols, on the same day they came into my sanctuary to profane it. And indeed thus they have done in the midst of my house. Furthermore, you sent for men to come from afar, to whom a messenger was sent, and there they came. And you washed yourself for them, painted your eyes, and adorned yourself with ornaments. You sat on a stately couch, with a table prepared before it, on which you had set my incense and my oil. The sound of a carefree multitude was with her, and Sabaeans were brought from the wilderness, with men of the common sort, who put bracelets on their wrists and beautiful crowns on their heads. Then I said concerning her who had grown old in adultery, will they commit harlotry with her now, and she with them? Yet they went in to her as men go into a woman who plays the harlot. Thus they went into Aholah and Aholibah, the lewd women. But righteous men will judge them, after the manner of adulteresses, and after the manner of women who shed blood, because they are adulteresses, and blood is on their hands. For thus says the Master Jehovah, bring up an assembly against them, give them up to trouble and plunder. The assembly shall stone them with stones, and execute them with their swords. They shall slay their sons and their daughters, and burn their houses with fire. Thus I will cause lewdness to cease from the land, that all women may be taught not to practice your lewdness. They shall repay you for your lewdness, and you shall pay for your idolatrous sins. Then you shall know that I am the Master Jehovah. So let's look at who we're talking about here. In verse 4 it says, and the names of them were Aloha the elder and Aholibah her sister, and they were mine, and they bare sons and daughters. Thus their names, Samaria is Aholah, and Jerusalem Aholibah. So we see here that this is allegorical. This story is talking about the tribes. Samaria is where Israel ended up, and Jerusalem is obviously the capital of Judea, of the Jews. And then we saw that we already read that Israel went into captivity, and the Jewish position is, well, they're the chosen ones. They had a perfect relationship with Jehovah, and that's why Israel went into captivity. And there is a move and there is a risk within the Messianic movement of people going back into Judaism. They think that Judaism is the pure faith, that it is correct, and that by going back into Judaism they please Jehovah. But look at what it says in verse 11. And when her sister Aholibah saw this, she was more corrupt in her inordinate love than she, and in her whoredoms more than her sister in her whoredoms. So although Israel became corrupt, although Israel went after false gods, although Israel turned their back on Jehovah, and the Jews believe they are the chosen people and they are the ones who are the holders of the law, they became more corrupt. They corrupted the law of Jehovah. They corrupted their relationship with him, and were more corrupt even than Israel. So neither Israel or Judah have any right to claim to be the pure descendants of Jehovah. So what are we told in the New Testament about this? Well, let's turn over to the book of Peter and let's see what he tells us. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 2, and we will start in verse 1. 1 Peter 2, starting in verse 1. Therefore, laying aside all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking, as newborn babes desire the pure milk of the word, that you may grow thereby. If indeed you have tasted, and you have seen that Jehovah is good, come to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by the Mighty One, and precious. You also as living stones, as being built up a spiritual house, a set apart priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices, acceptable to the Mighty One through Yahushua the Messiah. Therefore it is also contained in the Scripture, Behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he who believes on him will by no means be put to shame. Therefore, to you who believe he is precious, but to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offence. They stumble, being disobedient to the word, to which they were also appointed. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvellous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of the Mighty One, and had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. So we see that Peter tells us in verse 9, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvellous light. So those who accept Jehovah, those who are filled with the Spirit, those who choose to do his will, are a chosen generation, the royal priesthood. So it doesn't matter whether you are Jew or Israelite or Gentile. If you do his will, if you obey the commandments and do the will of Jehovah, you will be numbered among this chosen generation. And there is no differentiation between Jew or Gentile or Israelite. It's the attitude that we have as we come before Jehovah that decides whether we are in this spiritual nation, this spiritual Israel. But again, as I said before, that does not take away from the fact that there is still a physical Israel out there, and there is still a physical Israel who have got prophetic events to partake in before the end. And in fact, if you turn back just one page, and we go right to the beginning of the first epistle of Peter, let's just go to 1 Peter, and we'll just start in verse 1. Peter, an apostle of Yehoshua the Messiah, to the pilgrims of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, elect according to the foreknowledge of the Mighty One, the Father, in sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience and the sprinkling of the blood of Yehoshua Messiah. Grace to you and peace be multiplied. So Peter says, to the pilgrims of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, elect according to the foreknowledge of the Mighty One, the Father, in sanctification of the Spirit. So we see here that Peter acknowledges that there are pilgrims. There are those people who are true to the faith, who are scattered through the physical land. And just as Yehoshua sent the disciples to the lost 10 tribes of Israel, so Peter is speaking to these people. He's speaking to those who are true, who are ready to receive the word, who are faithful to Jehovah. And we see that they're in Asia, they're in southern Europe, they're in the Middle East. They are scattered abroad, just as we were told that the 10 tribes were taken out. But they are still recognizable to the disciples of the day. So, do we have any knowledge, do we have any understanding where these 10 tribes may be? Is there any scriptural evidence that helps us understand who the 10 tribes may be? Well, let's turn back to the book of Genesis, and let us see if there's any biblical evidence that helps us identify the 10 tribes. So let's start in Genesis chapter 49, and we'll start in verse 1. And Jacob called his sons and said, Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my counsel enter their counsel. Let not my honour be united in their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Judah, you are he whom your brother shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies, your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey my son have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him? The sceptre shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good, and that his land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. Dan shall judge his people. As one of the tribes of Israel, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backwards. I have waited for your salvation, O Jehovah. Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong. By the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the mighty one of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lie beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb, blessings of your father. Have exalted the blessings of my ancestors to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who has separated him from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. All of these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them, and when he blessed them. He blessed each one according to his own blessing. So let's look at verses 16 and 17. It says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that bites the horse's heels so that the rider falls backwards. There's another statement about Dan when we read the Old Testament. It says that Dan shall place the name of their father where they reside. So what we're given here is a prophetic clue as to how to find the children of Dan. Dan leaves a trail wherever he goes, and we're told in other scriptures that Dan leaves the name of their father wherever they reside. Now in Hebrew the vowels are not written, so wherever you see the letters D and N together, you will have a clue about where the tribe of Dan may have been. And also we need to understand that Dan were seafarers. They lived in the coastal lands. They were mariners and seafarers. And so if we take that information and we look at this map as we come up from the Middle East and we come to Europe, you can see there are several major rivers there. There is the Don, the Dnieper, and the largest river, if you look, running from the Black Sea all the way up through Central Europe up towards Northwest Europe, you have the Danube. Okay, and there's also other smaller rivers, the Donets, and there is where you see the Black Sea there, that coastal that small channel is called the Dardanelles. So you can see that there are several places where the tribe of Dan, who were mariners and seafarers, could have moved up through Europe. And actually, if we look at some of the archaeological evidence, there is a very strong indication that the migratory paths from the Middle East were as follows. We see in the green the original trading routes, the original pathways of the Israelite tribes, going from Judah and Israel along the Mediterranean, and we can see up through southern Europe. We see there the Iberian Peninsula, and remember that these traders, the seafarers, were very successful traders, and we know that their father was Eber, so it would not be a stretch to see that they claimed that peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, for the Israelite tribes. And then as we see, they come up the Atlantic and they come to that place that we see is Tuatha de Danann. Tuatha means people or tribe, and we can see here one of the interpretations is that Tuatha de Danann are the tribes of Dan. Now there is debate over that, whether that really means it, but one of the things that in Gaelic it said, remember we saw in that scripture, it said Dan shall judge his people. It also says in Gaelic, one of the words for the word for a judge or someone who pronounces fate is Dan. So in Gaelic the word Dan means a judge, and so we see that corollary back to the Israelites. And then we see the second migration through Scythia and Cilicia. And there's also, again, if you think about the Hebrew, where the vowel points are not written, the children of Isaac would just be known, if they were written down, if it was carved on a stone, would be the SCs, and you see the Scythians here, and the Sacae. And one of the tribes who migrated and settled in England were called the Saxons. And if you think about the phonetics of that, you come to the Sacae sons, the sons of Sacae, the sons of Isaac. So we can see there's lots of linguistic evidence to point to these migrations. And if you look at where Denmark is, south of Norway and the Scandinavia, Denmark, if you were asking where would you find the tribe of Dan today, what do we call the people who come from Denmark? We call them the Danes. What does the scripture says? The tribe of Dan will leave their mark, the name of their father, wherever they go. So if there was any place on earth we wanted to find the tribe of Dan, it would be Denmark. And again, you can see that's a pivotal place for these migratory paths from the Middle East, through Europe, through the Mediterranean, and up through Eurasia into where they finally settled in northwest Europe. So there's a lot of evidence to point to the migration of the children of Israel moving through Europe and settling on the western and the northwest part of Europe. And we talked about some of the phonetic indication, but this is another one that really jumped out at me when I saw it. In Hebrew, the word berit means covenant, and the word Issa or Ish means people. So the Brit-ish, the Brit-ish would be the people, or the covenant people, the people of the covenant. We heard in the scripture that we read, the children of Israel were a chosen people. They were chosen to keep the covenant. The children of Judah still call themselves the people who keep the covenant. So we can see here that the British are, in Hebrew, British could indicate that these are the people who keep the covenant, or who at least should be keeping the covenant. And so we can see that through this migration, through the ancestry, that the British people could be part of the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel. Now, there are many people who would argue against that. There are many people that would say, well, just using phonetics is inadequate. And there are a lot more evidences, there are a lot more proofs that you can look at to substantiate this position. But let's look at the Bible, and let's look at what the Bible tells us about this. Let's go back to Genesis 49, and here it says in verse 22, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him, and shot at him and hated him. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hand were made strong by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. So, Joseph, if you were looking for a country in the world today that was symbolized by the name Joe, where would you look? Well, obviously America. G.I. Joe. We understand that the Joes are the remnant of Israel. Just as the Jews are the remnant of Judah, so the Joes are the remnant of Joseph. Joseph was the most highly blessed of the tribes. It says Joseph is a fruitful bough. It says he is. The archers have hated him. And if you look at America, America has been almost in a permanent state of warfare since it became a nation in the 1700s. But it has been greatly blessed. America had the highest gross domestic product. It had the most powerful economy in the world. It had the military might to hold the Cold War. It had the industrial might to save Britain and Europe from the Nazis during the Second World War. So America has fulfilled this prophecy regarding Joseph, and the fruitfulness, and America is considered to be the breadbasket of the world. So America has been considered to be the breadbasket of the world, and as such we can see that their fruitful nature and everything they've done, so we can see that the American people have fulfilled this prophecy of Joseph. And one of the things I use is the term the English-speaking empire. And so as we look at the prophecy for the children of Israel, we see this prophecy that they became fruitful. We see the prophecy that they would be hated by the world, and America is one of the most hated countries in the world. But if you look at the ascendancy of the British people, and I would argue that started in 1805 at the Battle of Trafalgar, and the British people were the dominant force in the world for the 1800s into the beginning of the 20th century. The British Empire spanned the globe. A quarter of the landmass of the globe were under the direct control of the British Crown. And then after the First World War, Britain was bankrupted both economically and physically through the terrible war in the trenches in the First World War. And that's when America came into its ascendancy with the Roaring Twenties and the enthusiasm and the spirit of can-do, the can-do attitude that the Joes brought to the world. And it was America's military and more so America's industrial might that stopped Britain falling to the Nazi scourge during the Second World War, that allowed the people of Northwest Europe and ultimately the people of all the world to be liberated from the darkness of fascism during that period. And so you can see that the military might of Joseph again saved the whole world. But as a result of that, we are now hated through those who are jealous and those who would see America wish to fall, and through our lack of leadership and our lack of adherence to the law of Jehovah and to his commandments, we are going to face the wrath of Jehovah. So let's look at another prophecy that gives us some indication about America and Britain. So let's just turn to Genesis 24. And let's just look at another prophecy that gives us some information here. Genesis 24, and we'll start in verse 57. So they said, "We will call this young woman and ask her personally." Then they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you become the mother of thousands, of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them." Then Rebekah and her maids arose, and they rode on the camels and followed the man, so that he parted. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now Isaac came from the way of Beer Lahai Roi, for he dwelt in the south. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field in the evening. And he lifted his eyes and looked, and there the camels were coming. Then Rebekah lifted her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from her camel. For she said to the servants, "Who is this man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So here we see Isaac, and we see that he has Rebekah as his wife. But look at the blessing that was put on Rebekah and the children of Rebekah. And they blessed Rebekah and said unto her, Thou art our sister. Be thou the mother of thousands of millions, and let thy seed possess the gate of those who hate them. Now what does that mean, possess the gate of those who hate them? Well, if you think about it, even today the ocean sea lanes are the most important trade routes in the world. Far more volume of trade is carried out by sea than by land or by air. And so remember I said that the British people, or the English-speaking empire, started in 1805 at the Battle of Trafalgar, and it was a result of the dominance of the Royal Navy that allowed the land armies of Europe to defeat Napoleon. It was only after the Battle of Trafalgar that the British Navy was able to starve the supply lines for Napoleon and his armies that turned the tide of the Continental War. Then after that, Napoleon was defeated. Then the British Empire, then came the sort of colonial expansion of the 1800s. Britain became the world superpower with the British Empire. And then, as I said, that mantle passed to America at the First World War. And America then became the world superpower. And until recently was the only superpower left in the world. But what does it mean about possessing the gate of those who hate them? Well, let's look at this map of the world and look at the major sea routes. Look at the way that trade runs around the world, around the various continents. And obviously one of the important places is where you can either shortcut, so you don't have to go around an entire continent, or where you have what would be considered a naval choke point. And if you look at the major sea gates or the major choke points around the world that would allow you to control global maritime trade, you have the Bahamas, which open up the Caribbean and South America, and of course that was held by Britain. You have the Panama Canal, which was owned by America, which cut off, which massively increased trade from east to west by allowing ships to pass through the Panama Canal and not have to go all the way around South America and round Cape Horn. And you have Cape Horn, and that was controlled. Chile was very, very friendly towards Great Britain. And you also have the Falkland Islands down there. And even as little as 30 odd years ago, there was still a major war over the possession of the Falkland Islands because of the strategic significance, both as an outpost but also for its oil reserves. You then see Gibraltar, owned by Britain, still a point of contention with the Spanish people. But whoever owns Gibraltar controls all the trade in the Mediterranean. You cannot get a ship out of the Mediterranean without passing through the range of any guns or warships that may be stationed at Gibraltar. And it is still a major British naval base to this day. You have the Suez Canal, which was jointly owned by the French and British up until the 50s, and all the trade going from the Mediterranean eastwards into Asia had to pass through the Suez Canal, or it had a horrible journey down the whole of Africa to go around the Cape of Good Hope, which was some of the most violent weather in the world, and then obviously a long treacherous journey all the way up the west coast of Africa to trade with the Far East. You had the Horn of Africa, which was another choke point which allowed people to control the Indian Ocean in that part, and then the Strait of Malacca, which controls all of the trade routes and all of the maritime trade travelling from China and into Australia, around the Philippines, and then coming to the west coast of America. Each one of those maritime sea gates was controlled by America or Britain during the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So again, the prophecy, the blessing on Rebekah, was fulfilled by Britain and America. So we can see another scriptural evidence that the British people, the English-speaking empire, are the physical descendants of Israel. Let's look at some more prophecy. Let's look at Genesis chapter 48. And let's look at another prophecy that can help us with this understanding. Genesis 48, and we'll start in verse 8. Then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom the Mighty One has given me in this place." And he said, "Please bring them to me, and I will bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I had not thought to see your face, but in fact the Mighty One has also shown me your offspring." So Joseph brought them from beside his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them, both Ephraim with his right hand towards Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand, and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hand knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "Mighty One, before whom my father Abraham and Isaac walked, the Mighty One who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has removed from me all evil, bless the lads, let my name be named upon them, and the name of my father Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into the multitude in the midst of the earth." Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them this day, saying, "By you Israel will bless," saying, "May the Mighty One make you as Ephraim and Manasseh." And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am dying, but the Mighty One be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given you over one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow." So the two sons of Joseph were called Ephraim and Manasseh, and his father blessed them, but he did something unusual. And it said in verse 19, his father refused and said, "I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations." So the older was Manasseh, and the younger was Ephraim. And traditionally the blessing, the ancestral blessing, should fall on the older child. But in this case, Jacob crossed his hands, so he put his left hand on Manasseh's head and his right hand on Ephraim's head, and in doing so he set Ephraim greater than Manasseh. Now Manasseh was the firstborn, and if you think there's a lot of contention within the church movement, within the Church of God, about who represents Britain and who represents America. But if we take this literally, Britain came first. Britain became a nation before America. Therefore Britain would be the older of the two children. And if you notice, it said, "He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great." And Britain, in its heyday, Great Britain was the only nation ever to have had great in its title, in its official title. But then it says, "But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations." And America, the younger of the two brothers, has become greater than Britain. The American gross domestic product, the American military might, American political influence, American manufacturing, American natural resources are all greater than Britain is now. Now maybe at the time of the British Empire, America was greater than Britain was greater than America, but now Ephraim, the children of America, or the children of Joseph, are more dominant. They have a superior position than the British people. And people get confused about that last clause that says, "And his seed shall become a multitude of nations." But if you think about America, the states have a much higher level of autonomy and independence, certainly than you would see in the counties of England. And so you could interpret that the various independent states who form the United States of America could fulfill that as separate nations. They have a much higher level of autonomy than you would see in Britain or any European country. So here we see another piece of scriptural evidence. If we take it literally and don't overcomplicate things, would indicate Great Britain being the descendants of Manasseh and America being the descendants of Ephraim. So that is a lot of evidence that we have presented to look at who are the lost tribes. But now there are prophetic indications that we need to understand. So let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 28 and let us understand some of the prophetic import of this teaching. Deuteronomy 28, and we will start in verse 1. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your mighty one, to observe carefully all his commandments which I command you today, and Yahweh your mighty one will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you, and overtake you, because you obey the voice of Yahweh your mighty one. Blessed shall you be in the city, blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, and the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your baskets and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. Yahweh will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before your face, and shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. Yahweh will command the blessing on you in your storehouse, in all that to which you set your hand, and he will bless the land which Yahweh your mighty one is giving you. Yahweh will establish you as a set-apart people to himself, just as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of Yahweh your mighty one and walk in his ways. Then all the people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of Yahweh, and they shall be afraid of you. And Yahweh will grant you plenty of goods in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, in the produce of your ground, in the land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers to give you. Yahweh will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give rain to the land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, you shall not borrow. And Yahweh will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only, and not beneath, if you heed the commandments of Yahweh your mighty one, which I command you today, and they are careful to observe them. So you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right or the left, to go after other gods to serve them. And we can see how America has fulfilled that blessing. The produce of America, the military might of America, the wealth of America, the financial power of America. America was the global creditor nation in the 50s and early 60s. America was known as the breadbasket of the world. American military might kept the Cold War in check. America has fulfilled all of these blessings. But notice what it says in verse 1. And it shall come to pass, if you shall hearken diligently to the voice of Yahweh thy mighty one, to observe and to do all his commandments which I command thee this day, that Yahweh the mighty one will set thee high above all the nations of the earth. And America has completely fulfilled this prophetic blessing. Unfortunately, the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy carries on for another 60-odd verses. It carries on to verse 68. And this is how it starts in verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of Yahweh your mighty one, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes which I command you today, then all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. And if you look at where America is today, we are taking the 10 Commandments out of our schools and our courthouses. We are taking prayer out of our schools. We are promoting promiscuous lifestyles. America is the global capital of pornography. The pornography industry in America accounts for more wealth than the 3 major TV channels combined. America has, the President of America said, America is no longer a Christian nation. So we have turned our back on Yahweh. We have turned away from him, and Yahweh tells us explicitly what will happen. So let's turn to the end of Deuteronomy, to the last few verses of Deuteronomy 28, and let us look at the curse which will befall this people because we have turned away from Yahweh. Deuteronomy 28, and we'll start in verse 58. If you do not carefully observe all the words of this law that are written in the book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, Yahweh your mighty one, then Yahweh will bring upon you and your descendants extraordinary plagues, great and prolonged plagues, and serious and prolonged sickness. Moreover, he will bring back on you all the diseases of Egypt, of which you are afraid, and they shall cling to you. And every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of the law will Yahweh bring upon you until you are destroyed. You shall be left few in number, whereas you are as the stars of heaven in multitude, because you would not obey the voice of Yahweh your mighty one. And it shall be that just as Yahweh rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you, so Yahweh will rejoice over you to destroy you, and bring you to nothing, and you shall be plucked from off the land which you go to possess. Then Yahweh will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. And among those nations you shall find no rest, nor shall the sole of your foot have a resting place. But there Yahweh will give you a trembling heart, failing eyes, and an anguish of soul. Your life shall hang on doubt before you. You shall fear day and night, and have no assurance of life. In the morning you shall say, Oh, that it were evening, and at evening you shall say, Oh, that it were morning, because of the fear which terrifies your heart, and because of the sight which your eyes see. And Yahweh will take you back to Egypt in ships, by the way which I said to you. You shall never see it again, and there you shall be offered for sale to your enemies, as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. So in verse 62 it tells us, And ye shall be left few in number, whereas ye were as the stars of heaven for multitude, because you would not obey the voice of Yahweh thy mighty one. And just as we ascended, the British and American people became the ascendant people over the last 200 years. We had massive population growth. We had America, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, all of these great lands and abundances and a great people. Now, because of our materialism, our birth rate is declining. The English-speaking people, the Anglo-Saxon descendants, have a lower birth rate, a birth rate that does not sustain our population. The people from around the world have much higher birth rates, and so simply by the law of mathematics, we will ultimately be bred into insignificance and will be bred out of existence. And Yahweh will allow this because we have turned our back on him. And as such, we will end up becoming a byword. America will inevitably fall. Britain will fall. The descendants of Israel will go back into captivity. And as it said in verse 68, and they will offer you as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. So the end state for the children of Israel, America and Britain, is to go into decimation, to go into captivity, to go into slavery. And we do this because we have turned our back on Yahweh. In fact, I saw something on the internet a few days ago. Because of this concept of the separation of church and state, the Church of Satan in Oklahoma are demanding the right to put a statue of Baphomet, the horned goat god, on the legislature grounds in Oklahoma, if the state of Oklahoma chooses to keep the Ten Commandments. Now, when we spit in the eye of Yahweh in that nature, his wrath will be upon this people, and it will be a terrible sight to behold. The scripture says it is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living mighty one. So, if that prophetic statement plays out, what will be the ultimate end for our people? Well, let's turn to Jeremiah and let us find out how the story ends. Jeremiah chapter 30, and we'll start in verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, Thus speaks Yahweh, mighty one of Israel, saying, Write a book for yourself all the words that I have spoken to you. For behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, that I will bring back from captivity my people, Israel and Judah, says Yahweh, and I will cause them to return to the land which I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. Now these are the words that Jehovah spoke concerning Israel and Judah. For thus says Jehovah, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear and not of peace. Ask now and see whether a man is ever in labour with child. So why do I see every man with his hands on his loins, like a woman in labour, and all faces turned pale? Alas, for the day is great, so that none is like it. But it is the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, says Jehovah of hosts, that I will break his yoke from your neck, and will burst your bonds. Foreigners shall no more enslave them, but they shall serve Jehovah their mighty one, and David their king, whom I will rise up for them. Therefore do not fear, O my servants Jacob, says Jehovah, nor be dismayed, O Israel, for behold, I will save you from afar, and your seed from the land of their captivity. Jacob shall return, have rest and be quiet, and no one shall make him afraid. For I am with you, says Jehovah, to save you, though I make a full end of all nations where I have scattered you. Yet I will not make a complete end of you, but I will correct you in justice, and will not let you go altogether unpunished. For thus says Jehovah, your affliction is incurable, your wound is severe. There is no one to plead your cause that you may be bound up. You have no healing medicines, all your lovers have forgotten you. They do not seek you, for I have wounded you with the wound of an enemy, with the chastisement of a cruel one, for the multitude of your iniquities, because your sins have increased. Why do you cry about your affliction? Your sorrow is incurable because of the multitude of your iniquities, because your sins have increased. I have done these things to you. Therefore all those who devour you shall be devoured, and all your adversaries, every one of them, shall go into captivity. Those who plunder you shall become plunder, and upon all whom prey upon you I will make a prey. For I will restore health to you, and heal you of your wounds, says Jehovah. Because they called you out, an outcast, saying, This is Zion, no one seeks her. Thus says Jehovah, Behold, I will bring back the cavity of Jacob's tents, and have mercy on his dwelling places. The city shall be built up its own mound, and the palace shall remain according to its own plan. Then out of them shall proceed thanksgiving and the voice of those who make merry. I will multiply them, and they shall not diminish. I also will glorify them, and they shall not be small. Their children also shall be as before, and their congregation shall be established before me. And I will punish all who oppress them. Their nobles shall be from among them, and their governor shall come from their midst. Then I shall call him to draw near, and he shall approach me. For who is this who pledged his heart to approach me, says Jehovah? You shall be my people, and I will be your mighty one. Behold, the whirlwind of Jehovah goes forth with fury, a continuing whirlwind. It will fall violently on the head of the wicked. The fierce anger of Jehovah will not return until he has done it, and until he has performed the intents of his heart. In the latter days you will consider it. So here we have an end-time prophecy. It says very clearly in verse 24, in the latter days you will consider it. But in verse 18 it says this, Thus saith Jehovah, Behold, I will bring again the captivity of Jacob's tents, and have mercy on his dwelling places, and the city shall be builded upon her own heap, and the palace shall remain after the manner thereof. Now, if our understanding is correct that the British and the American people are the descendants of Jacob, and we understand correctly that this is a latter-day prophecy, it means that before this prophecy can be fulfilled, Jacob, Britain and America have to go into captivity. So prophetically, before Yehoshua can come, Britain and America have to be destroyed. They will fall. And only when they have fallen and been taken into captivity can they then be taken out of captivity by Yehoshua and returned to their own land. Now, is there any other information that would indicate that the British and American people will ultimately be returned to the land of Israel? Well, let's turn back to the beginning of the book of Jeremiah. This time we'll go to Jeremiah chapter 3 and see what we are told here. Jeremiah 3, and we'll start in verse 6. Jehovah said also to me in the days of Josiah the king, Have you seen what backsliding Israel has done? She has gone up on every high mountain and under every green tree and played the harlot. And I said, after she had done all these things, Return to me, but she did not return. and her treacherous sister Judah saw it. Then I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but went and played the harlot also. So it came to pass through her casual harlotry that she defiled the land, and committed adultery with stones and trees. And yet for all this her treacherous sister Judah had not turned to me with her whole heart, but in pretense, says Jehovah. Then Jehovah said to me, backsliding Israel has shown herself more righteous than treacherous Judah. Go and proclaim these words towards the north, and say, return, backsliding Israel, says Jehovah. I will not cause my anger to fall on you, for I am merciful, says Jehovah. I will not remain angry forever. Only acknowledge your iniquity, that you have transgressed against Jehovah your mighty one, and have scattered your charms to alien deities under every green tree, and have not obeyed my voice, says Jehovah. Return, O backsliding children, says Jehovah, for I am married to you. I will take you from one city and two from a family, and I will bring you to Zion. And I will give you shepherds according to my heart, who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. Then I shall come to pass, when you are multiplied and increased in the land in those days, says Jehovah, that they will say no more, the ark of the covenant of Jehovah. It shall not come to mind, nor shall they remember it, nor shall they visit it, nor shall it be made any more. For that time Jerusalem shall be called the throne of Jehovah, and all the nations shall be gathered to it, in the name of Jehovah, to Jerusalem. No more shall they follow the dictates of their evil hearts. In those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land, out of the north, to the land that I have given as an inheritance to your fathers. But I said, how can I put you among the children and give you a pleasant land, a beautiful heritage of the host of nations? And I said, you shall call me my father, and not turn away from me. Surely as a wife treacherously departs from her husband, so have you dealt treacherously with me, O house of Israel, says Jehovah. A voice was heard in the desolate heights, weeping and supplications for the children of Israel. For they have perverted their way, they have forgotten Jehovah their mighty one. Return, you backsliding children, and I will heal your backslidings. Indeed, we do come to you, for you are Jehovah our mighty one. Truly in vain is salvation hoped for from the hills, and from the multitude of mountains. Truly is Jehovah our mighty one, is the salvation of Israel. For shame he has devoured the labour of our fathers from our youth, their flocks and their herds, their sons and their daughters. We lie down in our shame, and our reproach covers us. For we have sinned against Jehovah our mighty one, we and our fathers, from our youth, even to this day, and have not obeyed the voice of Jehovah our mighty one. So we're told in verse 18, in those days the house of Judah shall walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given for inheritance unto your fathers. And as we saw, Israel went into captivity before Judah. Israel was carried away, never to return to the land. Judah went into the Babylonian captivity, but then returned to the land. So this cannot have been fulfilled. Judah and Israel have not yet walked together. So this again must be an end-time prophecy. And it says they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land of I have given you as an inheritance. And if you look at a map, directly north of Jerusalem is Moscow. If you look at as America is in its descendancy, as we give up of our economic and our military might, Russia is in its ascendancy. Russia has invaded Crimea. There is a Jewish rabbi who was considered to have prophetic visions who said, when Russia takes the Crimea, the sound of Messiah is coming. And we've just seen Russia has recently taken Crimea, and the West is impotent. America has done nothing to defend the people of the Ukraine. So we can see here that these prophetic statements are all coming together. And if America and Israel go into captivity, it would make sense that they would be captive by the world superpower of Russia, partnering with China. And again, this has a parallel in the Four Horsemen of Revelation. But we can see that the demise of America and the West will be brought about by Russia and China. The descendants who survive will be in captivity, but ultimately Jehovah will bring Israel and Judah together to return to the promised land. So let's bring this study to a close, and let's look at the final prophecy regarding Israel and Judah. Let us turn finally to the book of Ezekiel, and let us read what Ezekiel has to say about this end time situation. Ezekiel 37, and we'll start in verse 1. The hand of Jehovah came upon me, and brought me out in the spirit of Jehovah, and sat me down in the midst of the valley, and it was full of bones. Then he caused me to pass by them all around, and behold, there were very many in the open valley, and indeed they were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? So I answered, O Master Jehovah, you know. Again he said to me, Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Jehovah. Thus says the Master Jehovah to these bones, Surely I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. And I will put sinews on you, and bring flesh upon you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am Jehovah. So I prophesied, and I commanded, and as I commanded there was a noise, and suddenly a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. Indeed, as I looked, the sinews and the flesh came upon them, and the skin covered them over, and there was no breath in them. And he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to the breath, Thus says the Master Jehovah, Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath came into them, and they lived, and stood upon their feet, an exceedingly great army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They indeed say, Our bones are dry, our hope is lost, and we ourselves are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, Thus says the Master Jehovah, Behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up from your graves, and bring you into the land of Israel. Then you shall know that I am Jehovah, when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up from your graves. I will put my spirit in you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I, Jehovah, have spoken it, and performed it, says Jehovah. And the word of Jehovah came to me again, saying, As for you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it, for Judah and for the children of Israel his companions. Then take another stick and write on it, for Joseph the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions. Then join them one to another for yourself, into one stick, and they will become one in your hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, Will you not show us what you mean by these? So say to them, Thus says the Master Jehovah, Surely I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his companions, and I will join them with it, and with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and this will be one in my hand. And the sticks on which you write will be in your hand before their eyes. Then say to them, Thus says the Master Jehovah, Surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations wherever they have gone, and will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king over them all. They shall no longer be two nations, nor shall they ever be divided into two kingdoms again. They shall not defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will deliver them from all their dwelling places, in which they have sinned, and will cleanse them. Then they shall be my people, and I will be their mighty one. David my servant shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They shall all walk in my judgments, and observe my statutes, and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given to Jacob my servant, where your father dwelt, and they shall dwell there, they and their children's children forever. For my servant David shall be their prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary in their midst for evermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Indeed, I will be their mighty one, and they shall be my people. The nations also will know that I, Jehovah, sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. So we're told here, say unto them, thus saith the Master Jehovah, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in mine hand. So brethren, as we've studied the scriptures, as we've shown from the scripture, Judah and Israel are separate nations. Israel went into captivity and was dispersed into northwest Europe, where the blessings of Israel were manifest in Great Britain and America. And just as the blessings were manifest in those two countries, so the cursings will also be manifested on those two countries. But in the time of the end, Jehovah will bring back his people. Jehovah will reunite Judah and Israel. They shall again become one. They shall become a chosen people, and they shall have Jehovah as their mighty one. So brethren, those of us who are called, those of us who have accepted the calling to be called the children of the mighty one now, let us pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Let us pray for the children of Israel, and let us pray that they may come to Jehovah, to him, to his love and to his protection before the time of the end and the destruction of our people comes upon us. Amen.